right.
Yeah, so I don't have much of a introduction here today for this meeting. We had our little video training that Danielle, Marie, and myself put on. Hopefully that was helpful for some of you that were able to watch it. I have received a couple of questions by email already, so maybe I'll just quickly zip through a few areas where I've already gotten some questions. So one is that we have this year, we've requested that for every task, people select the primary basin that task is focused on, and that just helps us with our overall evaluation of equity around the state. So that's one of the changes from last year. And so if you're working across multiple basins, we just ask that you select the basin that you're doing the most work in. And then you can put in the narrative the other basins that you're planning to work in as well. And another area of questions that we've received is around the funding for alternates with the Basin Water Quality Council funding. And so we're not, for people who are alternates and their main representative were the same organization, they can be funded through that Basin Water Quality Council funding as part of the work plan template, but that we are not funding individuals who are just alternates as an independent organization through that. So we're requesting that people can put in the $300 that's available for training for that. So I'm happy to talk with individuals if you have some specific questions. I think there's just a few organizations that are in that situation that they're the alternates. So that's an area that I know we've gotten a couple questions by email so far. So Danielle, I don't know if you have any questions in the chat, or if anyone wants to raise a hand to have a question around the work plan template.
Nothing in the chat yet.
Yeah, so I mean, the way we've structured this is we are really looking for any questions that people have as they're filling out their templates. And I know there's several, I don't know if there's some new organizations here today who, hopefully people have started this process.
Okay, one question. If people missed the training you referred to, is there a recording that you can share? Let me grab that link.
Yes, there is. So thank you, Marie, for putting that in the chat. And I guess another piece to talk about is that today we're really going to be focusing more on any technical questions people have around the work plan template, but that if you have specific questions around what's a priority in your basin, those are really conversations that are most efficiently had with your individual watershed planner. So in the when we developed these work plan templates, we've made a few revisions this past year, but previously when we did this, there were several questions just around how to fill out the template, questions around the core funding levels, some questions around how to estimate costs and things like that.
So I'm kind of interested. We have a lot of people on the line, so I'm just wondering, did you call in because you thought maybe somebody might ask a question that might be useful to you? Or were you not clear as to what the purpose of the Q&A was? Just so that we have a better understanding of, why folks are on the line. Just because if nobody has any questions, then we don't necessarily have to continue the call. So it'd be good to know why people are here and what they're hoping to get out of the meeting today.
So there's a comment in the chat that they thought it was going to be a presentation. So we did the presentation as a video, which is that link that I just put in the chat. So you can watch that. Hopefully that'll explain feeling how to go about doing it. If you have anything, you know, if you're looking at your template spreadsheet, the template that was sent, I mean, is there anything in there that you're not clear on that we could explain to you? Chris said he came because his director didn't have time to come. He's working on the work plan, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, so the way that we had rolled this out was we gave it to the folks who are administering the work plan. So that would be Watersheds United, the I think Chittenden, and then VACD. Is that right? Did I get them all right? So they should have basically sent you an email that said, here's the training video, and then there are Q&A videos that will follow. So that was the setup. So it'd be good to know if folks didn't get that message, and we just need to make sure next time around that it's clearer.
So I'm assuming everybody did get the templates, right? Anybody not get that? Okay, good. So there are definitely questions on the intent of this, and mostly people are here to hear other people's questions.
I think I know I'm just catching up on everything because I was out on vacation. So I saw the template came in and I quickly saved them, but I honestly have barely started even thinking about this, even though it's due in 3 days, just because there's so many other things I'm trying to get caught up on. Having, you know, being someone who did do this before, and also in the weird situation that of covering so many different basins, I'm sort of assuming that what I would end up filling out in this template is going to pretty closely mirror probably what was there for last year, maybe with some specific tweaks based on where we are in the basin planning process. But so I guess my question is that a safe assumption? It doesn't look too different than what it was last year, besides maybe defining the basin, but I'm assuming like the content of the work for our purposes will probably be the same.
Yeah, so the template itself hasn't changed substantially. There are a few minor tweaks here and there, and last year we had a little bit of an issue with project development and some language in the template that kind of overlapped with project development, and now we've tried to be really clear that project development should be funded through the project development block grant. So and then I think the changes are probably more in terms of what the priorities are in your given region. And so if you've been working along and plugged away and accomplished something, then there might be a new task that's out there, or hopefully something that's been discussed at a regional coordination meeting that might be a new area of focus. So I wouldn't, you know, a lot of it can be very similar, particularly like the sector-based work groups are probably going to be very similar. But then again, some of the technical support and outreach might shift as there's different areas of focus. So I wouldn't suggest that it needs to be a huge overhaul from year to year, but probably a shift in some of those areas.
Thanks, Ben. There's a question that if we got funded last year, is there any way we will not get funded this year?
Yeah, funded last year. I mean, I think the notion is that if you're applying for these core tasks, that you'll be funded for those core tasks. So that is something that you should be funded for. If you put in for a task last year that's no longer a priority this year, or maybe there's more competition, it's certainly possible that one of those optional tasks might not be funded this year if it was funded in a previous year. So I wouldn't assume that funding for those optional tasks will necessarily move forward. But if you as an organization applied for funding and got funding for those core tasks, then you would certainly get that funding again this next year.
Yeah, and I wanted to add something before we go to Ken. So the video, I'm also going to put a link to the YouTube so it's on YouTube. You can access it from our website, the link that Marie shared. And what I did is I actually set it up by chapter too, so you can open it up, and if there are certain areas within the work plan that you're interested in learning about, you can look through the video by the chapters of the video. So that might be helpful for folks that are in a time crunch. The video is only 15 minutes. I definitely recommend just watching it. And then I think Marie and Ben also talked about if there were any changes, what those changes were and why they happened. And I think even a couple of the questions that Ben addressed initially were also covered in that training. It is closed captioned. I think we might have a transcript that I sent around, or at least sent to one person that asked for it. So if somebody wants a transcript, we can send that as well. The other thing too, Kathy, to kind of answer your question a little bit more, I think for some of the partners, if you worked on something the last period and you're still kind of working on those projects, like you were able to do like maybe just some of initial steps to those, it makes sense to continue those on to the next one. If you've kind of gotten to the end and you're like, oh, I accomplished 3 of those things this time, then the best thing you can do is go to the tactical basin plans, go to the strategy table. You can do Control F to search the name of your organization. And we do identify partners for each of the different strategies. And so honestly, when people ask me what they want, that's what I do. They're like, what do you want me to do, Danielle? So I go through, I look at their organization name, I look at the strategies, I see how they match up. One of the other things that I think is important is for everybody to think about putting time aside for coordination, like the coordination meetings, the regional coordination meetings, and then coordination within the groups. So where there might be things in the plan that talk about forming a work group or something like that, you might want to put some extra time aside for those things as they pop up. Like for regional planning commissions, because they're a representative of the municipalities, sometimes we might just ask them to come to the meeting. So they may not be the person hosting it, but maybe we just need them in case there's a connection with the town we need to make or something. And then vice versa with the other partners. So thinking about that too, that you save some time, put aside some time for things that might pop up that you need time for. And that's okay, Ben, right? I mean, if it ends up that they don't utilize that time, that's not a big issue, as long as it's not a lot of hours that it ends up being not used anyways.
So Remy has his hand up.
I think Kent did.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
At first. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, well, okay, this will be quick. I was thinking about what Ben said early on about the alternates on the basin councils being compensated through this block grant, and I'm kind of confused here. For one thing, the regional planning commissions have not said anything on the councils that I'm on about how we're going to be compensated, about how much or how it's going to be paid or who it's going to be paid to. We haven't gotten to that part of the discussion yet. Even as we approach July 1, I haven't heard anything. So I'm a little confused here. Are we supposed to be putting those hours into our block grant?
Yep. So for the regional partners, so for our regional planning commission representatives to a Basin Water Quality Council, our watershed group, and for our conservation district representatives, this tactical basin planning support grant is the way that you get funded to support your participation on the Basin Water Quality Council. And so last year we went through a process, and most of the organizations had a sense that they wanted to be on the Basin Water Quality Council, and they put forward in their work plan last year. And then we had some additional money that went directly to WUV and the conservation districts and regional planning commissions to allocate as those additional seats were identified. So you should have funding under your current agreement for your participation on the Basin Water Quality Council that you're involved with now. And then for next year, you should be putting in your work plan the basins that you're going to be on the Basin Water Quality Council for as a member. And what my point was before is that we're not paying for alternates to be part of this process. We just don't have the funding to pay members and alternates. So we're not that's the kind of line that we've drawn. You know, and the exception to that is if you're part of the same organization, it's possible to do some shifting of funding there. So I don't know, Kent, if you're the official member for a watershed group or an alternate, but that's the distinction there. So if you're an official, the official member, then you should be putting in for that funding in this current work plan.
All right, but the alternate should not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And are we only putting in for the hours of the meeting, or are we going to be compensated for our study outside of the meeting? I expect that when we start having grant proposals, I think it's going to be like when I was in vet school and I spent 3 hours outside the classroom for every 1 hour I showed up.
Yep. So that's the funding level that we put forward is, you know, roughly $2,000. Well, it's $2,000 a year for the participation, and then we've assumed about $300 this initial year for the training. And so that covers, you know, it depends on kind of how much people get paid and getting into those details, but, you know, with an average wage of $50 an hour, that's about, you know, 8 hours for the meeting. So it allows for some funding outside of the meeting time to do some of that additional work. Although it's also a little complicated by the meeting frequency that I think we're in a phase as Basin Water Quality Councils are starting, that they're meeting quite frequently to kind of get up and running. So I think that puts a little bit of pressure on the budget there, but we also aren't reviewing projects yet. So we're hoping that that amount of funding will work out for folks.
Okay, we'll see.
Remy, if you want to go next, and then we'll go back to the chat.
Lucy, stop it.
Can you hear me now? Great. Hey, Ben. Hey, Danielle. Two questions. The first is mainly just a formatting question, and I think I've got the answer, and I apologize if this is covered in the training, but for organizations that cover multiple different basins, we should put into the work plan funding for each of those basins. So like under regional coordination, we serve 3 basins. So there would be 3 lines for regional coordination, each dedicated to that basin.
No, so it's a little confusing here. So we're looking particularly in that regional coordination line for that to cover all the regional coordination and for that core funding level. But certainly if you have a larger region, that's where we have this option for people to say, actually, I cover 3 basins and they have 3 different sets of regional coordination meetings that I'm all attending and I'm active in. So you can request a greater amount than that core funding level for that reason. Okay. So that would be my suggestion there. And then when you get down to the Basin Water Quality Council is the only kind of exception to that rule, where essentially every Basin Water Quality Council you're on, you get that core funding level based on the number of those councils.
Okay, so for, you know, we serve 3 basins. So for outreach and technical assistance, for regional coordination, for primary basin, what would we put since we have 3 basins? Or would you just include all 3 in the primary basin category?
So that's where the reason we have that there is so we can do a quick assessment of how much money is going to each region of the state to make sure we're not kind of spending all of our money in one basin and that all of our basins are being kind of equally represented. And so last year we had this multi option, but that didn't really help us with that.
Okay.
So we're really asking you to say, okay, where am I spending the majority of my time? But don't worry about that too much because you can, within the narrative, say, you know, doing regional coordination in X, Y, and Z basins. But it's just a way for us to kind of get a sense of how much is being requested across each of these basins, because what we don't want to do is essentially underfund any one basin. We want to make sure that we have at least enough support for some of that work that needs to happen.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I think too, something that I've seen is, you know, how the way that Ben structured it is to have, you know, what's our primary basin. And then I've seen people structure it where they create like a line item for each basin, but I think the important thing is that the money lines up, that you're not creating like, you're not tripling the funding in the places where that's not allowed. And so I could see how if you're writing it, it might help you to be able to kind of separate, oh, this is how much time I'm going to spend in each one. And this is how much time I'm going to, or how much money I'm going to need for that. And I do recognize too that there may be folks that have basins that could be totally split in half and not necessarily have a primary. So I think that sometimes that can help as well. I mean, does that make sense, Ben, in terms of it really just comes down to that you're not like multiplying funding where that funding isn't available for more than one?
Yeah, and I think it's some of it's a simplicity factor, like the regional coordination. There's some organizations that covers 6 basins, and I just don't want the complexity there where you're not really defining, like most of these tasks, like when you get into the technical support and outreach, hopefully you have some pretty targeted tasks that you've identified there where you might be doing something very specific in one basin and something else in a different basin. And in that case, having it separated out is really helpful for us and for you in terms of reporting. But I think in that regional coordination, it can get a little, just, it's not too much of a big deal, but I don't want people to feel like they have to split every little thing apart, because then it gets confusing. So trying to do a little bit of lumping. And if you feel like lumping is really not working, then we can figure it out and worry about it. But I wouldn't stress too much about that primary basin it's not limiting you in any way. It's just kind of giving us a general sense of where things are.
Great, thank you.
So we're going to go back to that alternate funding. There's a question here. It says, I think Ben said that if the alternate is a member of the same organization, then this funding can be used to support them.
Yeah. So essentially, like it's a little bit, yeah, when you have an organization and you have an alternate and the main member through that organization, it's, the money is going to an organization to support involvement in the Basin Water Quality Council. So I think to me, it seemed kind of arbitrary to say, no, you can't do that, where it is allowed within that context. But the thing that we have wanted to avoid is like having alternates that aren't part of the same organization ask for the full core funding amount to be that alternate.
There's no other questions that I'm seeing in the chat, just that the funding is very much appreciated for all the efforts in getting collaborative work done. Oh, one more. When will the Basin Water Quality Council start meeting?
Yeah, so I think for the most part, Basin Water Quality Councils have started meeting, except for maybe 1 or 2. I'm not up on all of the schedules, and that's within the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog watersheds. So if you're in the Connecticut or Hudson, it's going to be several years, and it's still a significant process before clean water service providers would be established for those basins. So I think it might be the South Lake or maybe another basin that maybe hasn't met yet. So I'm not sure if there's a specific basin. You can always follow up by email, and we can get back to you on that to make sure that communication is happening with your clean water service provider.
And Jen, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I just joined like 10 minutes ago because I'm out here. And I'm trying to see who all is here. I see that there's a lot of people by phone, so I'm not sure if they're like mostly district folk, but I've been talking to several people who aren't here right now about this funding source, and I think what I'm struggling with is that the scope of work is actually really touches on a lot of what we do year round, across the board, as far as, working in water quality, and now the expansion into agriculture with the tactical basin plans. So it for me, it's like I could put my entire year's worth of work into this work plan, and I'm happy to do so. I think the reporting, that's where I struggle to break it out again, because, the reason that conservation districts exist in a lot of ways is to do community engagement, local coordination, project development. So we're funded to do that, and we do that, and we do it in a lot of different ways. And, hopefully this year we got some good news from the Senate. So it's likely that we may, in the future have appropriations to cover this type level of engagement, which would be great. But we don't have that right now. So I recognize that any funding source for us has been vitally important to us. But yeah, I guess I'm just kind of wondering if we're open to maybe just dialoguing more and brainstorming more about this and what it really means to report, because I've got plenty of questions, and I think a lot of other people might too. I wonder what you all think about it.
Yeah, so I think if I'm trying to get at your question, it seems like you maybe have two different but maybe related questions. One is kind of about how to pick which work you support through this grant, because there's so much work that districts do that overlaps with what's included in this work plan. And then it sounds like you have another question just around the reporting aspect of it. And so maybe to take the first question around how to decide what funding or where this funding can be most useful to you. I mean, we really look at this as our way to implement our tactical basin plans and to develop our tactical basin plans in an effective way. So kind of first and foremost, we want to make sure all of our partners are engaged and working together in our tactical basin plans, in our tactical basin regions. And so I think that's why we have that regional coordination there. And then we also want to make sure our partners have money to be part of the tactical basin planning process so that we can really identify those higher priority efforts. And then it's really to try to work through where we have priority strategies in our tactical basin plans. We generally have between 40 and maybe 60 or so strategies that we've identified that are really our top priorities. And that's where we're trying to focus in terms of these funds, is trying to implement those strategies. And so oftentimes there's kind of an area of technical assistance that's kind of unique, or some sub-watershed where we have a water quality issue where we know we need to get out there and do some work. So that's been my perspective on it. And I don't know, Danielle or Marie, if you have some other thoughts in terms of kind of how to.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think that there's a reality that the funding is limited, right? So there's only so much funding you can get from it. So it's trying to pick out, okay, well, if I'm going to ask for this much funding that I think I'm going to get to do this, what projects can I actually do? So, or what type of things can I work on? So there's an expectation that it's only going to fund so much. And then you and the planner kind of work together to figure out what are the top things that we want to use this funding to do. And like Ben said, in some cases, it could be we have a tactical basin plan on schedule. So it's making sure that we give you the capacity to be able to go to those meetings and help us coordinate to do that work. And then the regional coordination. But then there's all the other things. And so there's a recognition that there's only so much you can work on in a year. There's only so much that the tactical basin planning contract can support. So it's really trying to figure out what are those things, making them really clear in the work plan. And so when you're reporting back on those things that you identified in the work plan that you're going to do. And you say, this is what I worked on this quarter, and this is what the outcome of that was. So what I've found is that in the reporting back for the groups where we've kind of picked the different things that we're going to work on, the reporting back is pretty basic, pretty straightforward. It's we had this meeting, we had this discussion, and our next step is this. So it's really basic reporting. It's not in huge detail. It doesn't appear to take a lot of time. That's the goal, is to not have you report back in tons of detail, because we're already talking about some of this stuff in a lot of cases. So not to feel, I guess, overwhelmed with how much you have to report, but to be clear on what's actually been accomplished throughout the year.
Can I just throw in there? I today had a very exact estimate from one of our district managers that said it took 10 hours to complete the report.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe a follow-on conversation that we can have in terms of that reporting process, because that's certainly not our intent. You know, when we put this budget together, we put our kind of standard reporting is $800 per year, so roughly $200 per reporting cycle. And the intention is that we have a couple of these optional tasks that may be pretty specific, that's working in this sub-watershed to accomplish something, right? And so that really should be, here's what we said we're going to do, and maybe something fell apart and it didn't happen, and so that's the reporting, or maybe it went really well and you're moving on to the next step. So it's really not intended to be a complicated reporting process, and I think to the degree that the work plan is pretty targeted, it should make that relatively easy, that you're just kind of reporting back in terms of what was done when we had that. Although we also know that things shift. And I think that's one of the really unique things about this funding source, that it does allow us to say, actually, halfway through this year, that was a really bad idea, but some emergency happened over here. And we have that flexibility within this funding to shift if we're having those conversations. So I think that's another thing that's unique. It's not something we want to do too much. Yeah, it's a good conversation, and I think it's something that we can continue to have in terms of that reporting process and kind of understanding why it's taking folks that level of work.
And I do think that the more clear your work plan is, like your tasks that you're going to do are really clearly identified, then you kind of know as you do that task, oh, this is a work plan task. I'm going to keep a couple notes on this. So when you go back to write your report, you already have the information there and you can kind of copy and paste into the report. We also did a training on how to fill out the work plan report, and there's a bunch of different options of ways people can report, you know, based on how your brain works. That gives us the information that we need. So looking at that should also help for folks. But yeah, it shouldn't be taking 10 hours to fill in the reports, especially a quarterly report.
Can I request that we try to set up a meeting, like at least with the conservation districts? I think we're all having really, well, not me, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I've spoken to 5, and we're having some similar struggles, and it would really help if it were prior to any type of like application process for the actual, you know, the contract or anything like that, because I've heard a number of people just say, like, we'd love to submit work plans, and you know, but we need to decide whether we want to submit for a contract. So yeah, if we could, I don't know when that date, I have no idea when that date is. Do you know that date?
The date, which date are you, I mean,
The deadline for, so, you know, we have our March 12th or May 12th deadline for submitting work plans, but what's the date that you expect for actually like applying for money from Tactical Basin Planning for 2023, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of the application process for, it's a little bit, this is a very unique funding source, right? So this is the way that we've prioritized how much organizations get through this funding source, and then that essentially identifies how much the 3 regional partners receive, that they then subcontract to do these work plans that are approved. So
Who are the regional partners?
So it's, you know, we have Watershed in Vermont for our watershed groups. We have the Chittenden County RPC for our regional planning commissions. And then we've worked with Holden and now Claire and Jill for the conservation districts. And so It sounds like what it might make sense is for us to tee up a quick conversation at some point. You know, I'm happy to have that a quick touch base, because I think there's some sort of disconnect happening here. There really is not supposed to be a huge amount of effort here, and I think it'd be a real shame for this kind of disconnect to be impacting what's going on right now. So hopefully you can
I think it all
have
has
faith
to
that
do
we
with
can have this
our
conversation.
workflow, you know. Yeah, I think we have very different workflows and timing of flow, and I think that conversation. I concerned based on the conversations I had today, that by May 12th, we would be submitting any type of like monetary request from you, because I'm not prepared to do that. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, that's what these work plans are, is it's a, you know, an
It's not.
estimate of the amount of funding and the kind of work that you're hoping to do. So
We'll have to meet before then, I think.
yeah, I'm happy. I've got some time this week. So why don't we take that conversation offline? If that works, I can shoot you a quick email and see if we can kind of set something up.
Super duper. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Yep, thank you.
So we're over time now. We don't want to keep people for too much longer. Is there any last question before we sign off? People are exiting the chat, so I'm going to take that as a no.
Great, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Right, bye.